Good morning. Welcome to this morning's webinar. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, a part of the Office of Local Programs within ODOT. And we are very pleased to have our colleagues from DriveOhio with us this morning. I'm going to present for you on electric vehicle charging stations. Before I turn things over to our esteemed group of presenters, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you. First off, in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, we do have a copy of their slides for you. You can download them from there, or if for some reason your computer doesn't want to cooperate, we will be sending out a follow-up email afterwards with a link to the slides. Secondly, we're going to be running some polls during today's webinar. So when you have the poll open on your screen, it doesn't want to it doesn't want to record your response, hit the escape key, because that means you had your screen in full screen mode. And once it's out of full screen mode, by hitting that escape key, you will be able to provide a response to the poll. And then also, we have a questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, and that's where we're going to be asking you to put any questions you have throughout the presentations. We do have time reserved at the end to be able to address questions, and we're hopeful that there'll be a lot of them during the webinar this morning. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Luke Stedke, who is going to be your lead presenter today. Thanks. All yours, Luke.
Thank you, Victoria, and welcome everyone. My name is Luke Stedke. I do communication and policy work for DriveOhio. So let's dive right in. Just a quick agenda today. I will be going over kind of a high-level overview project updates for DriveOhio projects. Katie Zender, Miss NEVI program extraordinaire, will be covering that portion of the program, and bedding cleanup, actually bedding third, but we'll say cleanup, will be Rich Granger talking about EV workforce. After each presentation, like Victoria said, we will have a question. So you guys, we want to get some information from you. At DriveOhio, of course, you know, I'm sure everybody knows what we do. We talk a lot about connected, automated, shared, and electric. How we can help. When we talk about, you know, currently the state of play for ground and air vehicles, it kind of breaks down into like a more finite three groups. It's connected, automated, and electric. That's both on the ground and in the air. But we are here to help. We're here to connect. We're here to cut red tape. We're here to facilitate conversations between communities and industry with challenges when it comes to infrastructure and mobility. We'll start at the connected portfolio. September of last year, we cut the ribbon on what our Honda friends call the most connected highway in the world. That is 35 miles of fiber between Dublin and the east side, all the way to East Liberty, the doorstep of the TRC. Here's a little footage of that. When we did cut the ribbon and we were doing some media interviews about what the project is, you know, I wanted to articulate just how important the ecosystem was. You can see the investment in some of the details. A lot of the reporters were really like concerned with or wanted to get to the here and the now of what connected vehicles can do. And there's definitely, with the information, the data that is gathered, it is very important here and now. But just as important is the ability to have an ecosystem available to communities, to industry, to come together and not only develop this technology, but have a framework for scaling different technology as it evolves. We have a really good working relationship with the TRC. They cut the ribbon on their Smart Center in July of 2019. You know, whenever you look at a DriveOhio project, partnership is of paramount importance. We've got TRC on the ground, we've got Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory and Springfield Beckley Airport in the air. The ability to have in close proximity innovative thinkers that are focused on developing and scaling this technology is just it's something that we take for granted, but when we talk to other states or localities, people are always surprised and impressed. Smart Center, like I said, 540 acres. You'll hear some people talk about M-City and at the University of Michigan. Our friends at TRC like to say that M-City would fit in one of the retaining ponds. So when we talk about scale, the Smart Center is unlike any other venue in the United States. And with Honda just bringing on their new wind tunnel at $120 million and the ability for cross-industry development, it elevates Ohio's ability to develop and research this technology. A little bit about Marysville. A lot of times when we talk about the connected portfolio, we're talking about urban centers, urban settings. You can see right here, the highlighted little hexagon is a roadside unit. So the ability, when I think of connectivity technology, I think of more urban deployments, especially at intersections. Marysville is the first city in the United States to be totally connected, all 29 intersections. So the ability to show public value on all of our projects is extremely important, and building that trust in technologies at scales. Dublin is also a major partner. They have been focused on the connected environment in an urban city as well. Again, you'll see when we look at partners, that's the secret sauce to all of this. Our ability to build coalitions of like-minded innovators that see a challenge and want to work together, public, private, institutional, to kind of solve that challenge. Automation on the ground. We'll do some quick updates on the ADS program. This was our award in 2019. A lot of the development and research for autonomous systems happened in urban areas. USDOT really wanted to focus on rural deployments, roadways that may not be as developed as an interstate highway system, how these systems will be integrated safely into those roadways. I'll go back real quick. Just a quick project update. We've got vehicles. We have our partners at TRC are getting ready to start planning out on-road testing here in the next 3 to 6 months. So as these programs develop, be watching our social media pages, our website, excuse me, as we will be able to highlight and focus on some of these technologies as they start hitting the roadways. I-70 truck automation, we just received responses for an RFI. Industry and logistics companies, really interesting feedback. This is a partner program with our friends in Indiana. Again, when we talk about especially automated systems, trust is number one. Like, if these systems aren't trusted, nobody's going to use them, but very close. Number two is economic viability. If industry doesn't see value in deploying this technology, it's probably not going to scale. So this project deals with shipping in revenue service, shipping for revenue between Columbus and Indianapolis. So be looking for more updates on that in the near future. And of course, what we did, the Smart Circuit was the first automated shuttle in the United States. 16,000 passengers, 19,000 miles traveled. The Linden Leap was also a very interesting project. Through both of these projects, to me, especially on the Linden Leap side, the ability for the technology to pivot. We started that deployment, Smart Columbus started that deployment in February of 2020. Of course, we all know what happens in March of 2020. So the ability for the technology to see an opportunity that was maybe not in the design domain originally, but to be flexible. Again, we see that not only with automated technology, but a lot of that connected as well. The ability for the technology to pivot was one of the lessons learned for sure. And then the next deployment, the Q4 of 22 or Q1 of 2023 would be Youngstown, the Smart Network. They won a grant a few years ago, focused on streetscapes, but a part of that program was also an automated shuttle. So that will be coming up in the near future. A quick win that we had in our first, actually one of the first RFPs that went out was for a engineering guidebook, a CVAV system, the first of its kind we put out about a year ago. about 10 months ago, to get this information to local communities. When we talk about connected automated systems, interoperability is always one of the things that is very important. These systems need to be able to cross boundaries, cross states, and this is a first of its kind guidebook to kind of outline some of those systems needs and general guidelines around deploying these systems. And then, Katie's going to talk a lot more about the NEVI program, but we are in a really good spot vis-a-vis other states in reference to what we starting in 2020. The administration came to us around, seeing the investment from the industry, OEMs, knowing Ohio's history in manufacturing, and wanting to make sure Ohio is competitive in an ever-changing global market. We started with a siting study, and a lot of people ask, well, you're a non-ZEF state, why are you doing this? The consumers are driving the market. So when you look at market adoption and when you look at market investment, that's one of the reasons we're doing this. We also, in coordination with the Ohio EPA, we released our first siting study in June of 2020. That's also when they released their first tranche of Volkswagen settlement funds. So that is a charger on the right there that is at an ODOT facility. So we partnered for level 2 funding on some of those sites. So gaining some of that knowledge has really been valuable as we work to deploy and develop this NEVI program. We followed that up last year with our freight of electrification study again, trying to see where the market, where these shippers, where the industry sees value, and where they can, by utilizing said technology, have a revenue case for that. Now, this is a resource that we have on our website. You can track alternative fuel registrations across the state. I think it goes down to what zip code level. So another good resource to see in your community, what vehicles are there and what type of fuel they're utilizing. And of course, we can't forget about our friends in the air. The interesting thing with a lot of our advanced air mobility work is these companies have chosen electricity. A lot of the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, it's pretty self-explanatory, or eVTOL for shorthand, they've chosen the fuel of electrons. Sky Vision is it's what drives our success. Think of it as low altitude air traffic control. It is, especially on the drone side, if you're a Part 107 holder, you have to visually see where you're flying your drone. With Sky Vision, these flights can go beyond visual line of sight, not only but as our friends in the industry develop these electric vertical takeoff and landing, the man piloting may change to an automated function. So 140 square miles in Springfield, Ohio, it's what we call, the Huffman Pair of the 21st century. The things that the UAS Center and the team of the Fly Ohio side of the house are doing there, it's impressive. That's our first vertiport. That is not the vertiport that is at Springfield, but that is a Beta Technologies vertiport. There is one at Springfield, Ohio, and it's the first vertiport specific for eVTOL aircraft in Ohio. Beta's vehicle is also part of the platform is electrification. So there's charging stations there for ground and air vehicles. So really, as technology is maturing, we're kind of seeing silos being broken down and overlaps, especially on the ground and the air side. And of course, we do a lot of programmatic development. The NASA National Campaign, Fred Judson and his team, and the larger Fly Ohio team are very active in that, and also the Agility Prime program that runs from the Department of Defense runs out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So again, when we talk about assets, when we talk about partnerships on the ground and in the air, there really is no better place to develop not only the vehicles but the infrastructure than here in the state of Ohio. And that's my ugly mug, and that is my contact information. So if anything that I spoke about you have questions for, we're always here, and I appreciate the time. Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you, Luke. We're going to go ahead and launch that first poll question. And again, if you are not able to answer this poll question on your screen, hit the escape button to move yourself out of full screen mode, and then you'll be able to answer the question. I'm shooting for 70% and we are already there, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll out here in just a second. We have lots of folks who are responding, so I want to give everybody a chance to vote who wants to vote, and we appreciate the feedback. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close things out now. We actually got up to 90% as a response, and I'm going to share the results. We have 7% that said they do own an electric vehicle, and 93% said that they do not own an electric vehicle. So I'm going to hide those results now, and Katie, it is all yours.
Thank you. 7% is pretty high. So thanks. I'm going to speak a little bit about the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. So this is, as you know, there's a huge infrastructure bill that came out, was approved last year. A piece of that is related to electric vehicle charging. And the next few slides are going to focus on that piece. So the guidance for this funding came out in February of this year through Federal Highway. And there are basically, we say 3 federal pots, but it's basically focused on $5 billion that's in formula funds. So they're allocated to the states using the same distribution percentages as gas tax revenue. So Ohio is getting 140 million of these formula funds, and that's over a 5-year period. And then there's a separate 2.5 billion nationwide, and that is for discretionary grant funding. And it's broken into 2 different pots. There's one pot that's half of the funding is going to be for corridor charging, and then the other half is for community charging. And so this funding for the discretionary grants is actually open. It's beyond electric vehicles. So it also includes other alternative fuel vehicles like compressed natural gas, liquid natural gas, propane, and hydrogen. So the criteria for that first 5 billion, of which Ohio is getting the 140 million, is that the chargers need to be installed every 50 miles along the interstate. So the focus of this funding is on interstates and alternative fuel corridors, which I'll get into a little bit more later. But every 50 miles, and then within 1 mile of an exit is where the charger needs to be located. And these are very high-powered chargers, so you need to have at least 4 150 kilowatt DC fast chargers at each of these locations. And that equates to, like, obviously 600 kilowatts, which is the same amount of power that you would generally feed to run like a development if you're trying to get a sense of that. So it's significant levels. Generally speaking, the only installations that are at that level right now are the ones that Electrify America has done in some parts of the country. And they've partnered with different groups such as Walmart and other site hosts on some of those. So in general, most states are now trying to deploy this every 50 miles because there's not a ton of coverage already at that power level. So every state is required to submit a plan by August 1st in order to get access to these funds. And once the plan is approved, then they can get access to the 140 million in Ohio's case. So there's 14 different topics that need to be covered in this plan. These are the ones that are listed on here. We're going to talk a little bit more about a couple of these in a few more slides. But I'll just highlight, like, as far as like existing and future conditions, there's many different things that the feds want you to talk about, like traffic patterns, everything even to like weather and resiliency, and a variety of items. There's also equity considerations, which we'll talk about a little bit more, just a big focus. So specifically for Ohio, here's more information on the state of Ohio. You can see all these blue routes are the alternative fuel corridors. So Ohio already had almost all of their interstates, and then also a number of other routes, including Ohio 13, US 23, US 30, you can see running across the state, and then portions of US 33 were already designated alternative fuel corridors. So when this guidance came out, the states have been nominating corridors for years. They've already, the 6th round of corridors was due just on Friday, on the 13th. So these corridors have been nominated over time, and it wasn't clear what they were going to be used for, and now it's clear. So each of these alternative fuel corridors are the ones that need to be instrumented at that level that we just talked about. So every 50 miles within a mile of an interchange or intersection, and at those power levels. So here's a map that shows a little bit of information on how Ohio is thinking through this. So this shows you, if you look at the top left here, this is I-71, obviously, from Columbus to Cincinnati. And these are kind of broken into groups. So there's gaps when we're looking at where existing charging is, and then where gaps need to be filled in to provide complete coverage. There's some different groupings of options for how that could be done. And these interchanges are just ones that, in looking at the development and what exists in that area, and the likely power levels, it appears that there's likely 3-phase power. So there's sufficient power to install something at this level without significant infrastructure upgrades. So if you see the little box in that near Cincinnati on the most southern blue dot there, this is a blow up on the right side of that area. So this is just a GIS analysis of driving distance, 1 mile driving distance. So this would be like everything that would be covered within that 1 mile driving distance. And this is something that the state is looking to use in order to do better coordination with the utility companies, so that the utility companies know ahead of time what areas they're looking at and can plan ahead for when a procurement would maybe come out, like later this year, possibly. So another thing to note is that there have been a lot of charging programs through utility companies or through the Volkswagen settlement funds and other agencies, but they have not necessarily been administered with Title 23, Chapter 1 requirements. So that's the difference. With the federal funds, there's also comes some requirements related to right-of-way, different guidance related to NEPA, Buy America, and DBE participation. So the state is kind of working through what that's going to look like. But that's going to be a little bit different than some of the other programs that have already been rolled out. So as far as utility coordination, it's a complex web of, your major utility providers throughout the state, and then also you have some significant municipalities that kind of roll up under American Municipal Power, and there's also like many co-ops that are providing power within the state. So, and in some cases, you can get power from multiple different utilities at a single location. So identifying these locations and then coordinating with the utilities early, it kind of helps simplify things like several steps down the road. So Ohio's already started discussions with 2 years ago when the initial charging plan was done. They had conversations with utility companies, and also with the PUCO was very involved. And they've had another set of conversations in the last month, and those will continue just in order to make sure this is all well coordinated. There's also a lot of public engagement that's happening. Even this webinar kind of falls under that. And it falls into many different categories as defined by the guidance. So in Ohio, we've got the state agency coordination. We've kind of broken it into the planning partner, which we've met with all the MPOs and are having individual meetings now with several of them. Technical partners, which is, like we mentioned, the utilities, EVSE companies. There's a lot of stakeholder agencies beyond that, and equity, community, and you can see. And then there's also general public engagement that'll be happening a little bit later. So this kind of lays out what just the timing of some of that, which is evolving a little bit. And then we've got, so you may be familiar with Justice 40, which is basically 40% of the funds need to be provide benefit to underserved areas. And there's different definitions. Like for this guidance, they refer to disadvantaged communities, which is basically a composite of 30 different metrics that are evaluated. But states are also allowed to look at different rural statuses or other statuses to like define what that means to them. So we're going through that process right now. There was also supposed to be some more guidance provided on Friday, and it sounds like maybe that'll actually be coming out from the feds this Friday. So we'll see if there's more information on that. So what's the timeline for all this? Some of the planning began a couple months ago. The utility coordination, as I mentioned, happened a little bit, and there's going to be more about that. We think the guidance is now maybe coming out later this week or next week. We also are having some listening sessions with some grassroots organizations and others that'll happen in June. August 1st is when the plan is due, and then approval is expected by the end of September. And those discretionary grants that I mentioned, they are expected to come out starting in November of this year. So it's a good idea to start generating ideas for those. I think I also forgot to mention, so the $140 million that's coming to Ohio, once these alternative fuel cores are instrumented and approved by the feds, then that funding becomes discretionary. So then that money can be used for other areas throughout the state. This just kind of shows the different MPOs, and we've had a meeting that OARC had organized, which was helpful, presented to them a couple weeks ago, and then we're meeting with several others as follow-up, and we're trying to coordinate and harmonize plans with them. So here's my contact information, and I'm happy to take questions later, but I'm going to turn it over to Rich Granger.
Thanks, Katie. While you're doing that, I'm going to launch our next poll question. So if everyone could take a second and answer the question, we appreciate it. Again, hit the escape button if you've joined us and you're finding that you can't answer the question because you must be in full screen mode. And if you hit that escape button, it'll help you get out of full screen mode and be able to respond. So we are up over 70% who voted already. You guys are Johnny on the spot getting the responses to these polls, so thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap our poll up here and share the responses with you because I know Rich has great information to share with you. So the responses that we received, 24% have deployed electric vehicles in their fleet or charging infrastructure facilities, but 76% of you said no, that you have not. So I will hide the responses now, and it's over to Rich.
Great, thank you, Victoria, and thanks to Katie and Luke for setting up all this information. I'm gonna add a little more context and detail on the workforce side of things, and I'll maybe just add a quick editorial remark. I thought it was interesting in that second poll there, where you remember the first poll we had about 7% adoption at maybe at the individual level, but at the fleet level you saw 24%. So it sort of confirms a hypothesis that we've all had, that fleets may really drive the acceleration of adoption because they're making decisions in batches instead of individuals. So it's interesting. So good morning, everybody. I'm Rich Granger. I'm with DriveOhio. My role is workforce and economic development. And we're going to talk today about our existing and emerging workforce as it relates to electric vehicles and electrified mobility. As Luke reminded us, this isn't just on the ground, although we're really leaning into the ground vehicle side of it, but the infrastructure we're building out can support air mobility into the future as well. So just a quick primer on the way that we view workforce development at DriveOhio with a whole bunch of partners that we work with. We say we go from pre-K to PhD. So we're engaging our youngest learners from pre-K to 12, and that overlaps with career technical with a lot of problem-based learning and getting students involved with hands-on development activities. We'll give a few examples of those as we go through this. In the middle there, we're preparing students for their first, hopefully second and third internships, often starting those internships in high school whenever possible. So if you're an employer out there, whether you're a public or private sector, definitely consider high school interns as a candidate. This summer is already upon us, but there's plenty of great programs all around the state for that. We work with both career tech and higher education on those programs for a lot of, like we say, work-based learning to really bring practical concepts into the classroom and to give students just continuous input for their resumes as they prepare for their careers. And then, of course, we work with incumbent workers on upskilling with a special focus on the great program called Tech Cred in Ohio that offers reimbursement to employers for upskilling of their employees. But we do all sorts of different outreach and engagement, sometimes within the ODOT workforce, but other times with many of our partners who are all smart mobility stakeholders with these different technologies. And I always like to lead with an example. This was a picture from just last week. We were out at Columbus City Schools at Westgate Elementary for the whole day with some small robots there that we were doing a coding activity with. And we're looking to add an electric vehicle activity in the upcoming school year. So we're going to be brainstorming that over the summer. I'll put a call out there. If anybody has ideas or resources, please share them with us. We're all about open source sharing of information to get students of all ages excited about electric technology. And to be totally honest, we do not have to get them excited. They're leading us to the topic. All we need to do is just touch on it a little bit, and they really lean into it. So it's exciting to see that energy, and we can get a lot of great ideas from our youngest learners all around the state. So let's talk a little bit about the workforce strategy for the state of Ohio as it relates to electric vehicles. I'm going to zoom out just for a minute, and then we'll zoom back into charging infrastructure. Let's talk about all things electrified mobility for a moment. I think Luke touched on it earlier. This really hits a sweet spot for the state of Ohio in terms of what we're good at. We're good at designing things, building things, deploying them. And so while we are excited about the opportunity right in front of us to deploy this electric vehicle charging infrastructure, there's equal, if not even greater opportunity to build the vehicles themselves and all the support equipment that goes with it. And so we're thinking about this, as you can see here, holistically. We're designing, building, operating, and maintaining all of this equipment, whether it's the vehicles on the ground, the vehicles in the air, or all of the support equipment and supply equipment to go with it. And so with that holistic view in mind, we're working with a variety of state agency partners, led and coordinated through the Governor's Office of Workforce Transformation, led by the Lieutenant Governor, with strong input from Jobs Ohio, Ohio Manufacturing Association, and many other stakeholders around the state. We're just getting started on some industry and employer outreach around some of those target areas I just talked about to make sure we're staying in close contact with employers to say, what are the workforce needs? Where are the gaps? What successes already exist that we can promote and accelerate? And really that program that I talked about earlier, Tech Cred, is where a lot of that energy comes together, where we are making sure that we're using all the workforce development assets and programs that already exist around the state for other sectors and just bringing that same playbook to the electrified mobility sector. So you can see here in green some of the funding opportunities, whether it be RAPIDS funding to upskill or to retool learning environments, to Tech Cred for upskilling, and everything in between. We're bringing all the state's assets to bear on this important emerging sector of our mobility economy here in the state. So I'm going to wrap it up with a few specific comments about National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program guidance on the specific topic of workforce. I'm not going to read all the language here, but you can see in the lower right highlighted this very specific type of training called Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program. EVITP is the acronym for that. And so because Federal Highway has really highlighted that national program, which has been going for several years now, as one of the elements of recommended elements of state plans. Of course, we're leaning into that. So we're proactively getting EV ITP added to the Ohio Tech Cred list of credentials. We're working with the governor's office on that activity. And we're also actively talking with both training providers and employers about how they've already been using this training, how they're interested in expanding around it. Because as you think about it, we're going to need more and more skilled electricians to do this work, the installation of the charging infrastructure and then the maintenance of that same equipment. So great opportunities to upskill qualified electricians. We're excited about the opportunities around all of that, and we're making sure that the state's programs are really bringing everything to bear that they can to help our incumbent workers and employers to meet this piece of the puzzle. And so just to maybe close out with just a few remarks about how we can engage our youngest learners, because it's something we're always focused on here at DriveOhio. We're scaling up a program called Smart Mobility Ambassador in the fall, where we're training high school students to do STEM outreach programs, and we do plan to have electric vehicles and electrified mobility as a featured activity and a featured component in the fall. So like I said earlier, we're always open to ideas on what that might look like in a classroom or after school setting. And we're also doing work with teachers and curriculum developers on what kind of creative classroom activities can we do. Just this past year, the Ohio STEM Learning Network had a statewide design challenge. And so we're always looking at ways to empower students to reimagine their own communities, and working alongside with stakeholders, just like the exact audience on today's webinar. So if any of these workforce topics is of interest to you and your teams, and you want to get involved in any way, you can reach out to us. We have an email address. It's workforce@drive.ohio.gov, and you can reach out to us on the workforce topic. And of course, we've got our own contact information here. You're always welcome to reach out to me directly on these topics. And I think we were going to put a remark in the chat if it hasn't made it there yet, but we also have a website for all things electric. drive.ohio.gov/electric has all the resources that we've been sharing with you today. And once this webinar is recorded, well, I'm sure we'll post it up there too. That concludes my remarks. Victoria, I'll turn it back over to you for Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. And I'm going to go ahead and launch your poll question real quickly. So if you guys wouldn't mind responding to the poll question, we would appreciate it. And we have a number of questions in the question box. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading those off as we run the poll. The first question is, how long does it generally take to charge at these stations? So whoever would like to field that one.
So we assume that we're talking about a DC fast charger.
If they're not, they can put that in the question box and I'll let you know, but go with that one.
So DC fast at 150 kilowatt, let's say, I would say what, 90 miles an hour?
Yeah, it's a lot shorter. So like if you probably only.
We can't hear Katie. She'll need to get closer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's shorter for these fast chargers. So it depends on the car and the exact power level, but 15 to 40 minutes. If you're doing like a level 2, which is more common for, like, you can install those at your house or at like workplaces, that's normally like an 8-hour period. And then if you have level 1, which is more like just the outlet, a typical outlet that you have anywhere in your, in house, 110, that could take, 20 hours or more. So
thank you. Stay close. I'm going to read the poll results, but most of these questions, Katie, I think are going to be for you because they came in during your presentation. On our poll, we were asking, does your workforce have the training needed to install and maintain electric vehicle charging stations? And 10% of you said yes, but 90% of you said no. So I'm going to go ahead and hide those results, and we'll go to the next question that was in the question box. What does, quote, other alt fuel corridor, end quote, on the map indicate? Small section of US 33 road in rural southeast Ohio.
can we go back there?
Yeah.
Oh, I know what that means. So when I mentioned you can have different types of fuels, so that means it's either like a hydrogen or a propane or compressed natural gas corridor. So in the past, and even up through this round, like when you nominated alternative fuel corridor, you have to specify which fuel type you're nominating it for.
Great. Next question. This individual said, I am with the city of Sylvania along US 23 at the Ohio-Michigan border. Would we be eligible for a DCFC?
So when Katie was first talking about the program, the first year is focused on that formula-based program. There are going to be 2 discretionary pots of funds. What we are waiting on further guidance on. So, some of the conversations we've had with local communities is being, when do we start and how do we go about it? I would say that like start now, especially building coalitions. So specifically to that individual's question, not for the corridor-based funding, not for the formula funding, but for the discretionary funding, those 2 separate pots that end up being 2.5 billion. Those will be program-based allocations. So I would say start thinking about applications and developing, partnerships, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and Ohio hasn't gotten to the point of figuring out, like, once the 140 million becomes discretionary, once all these corridors are built out, like the details of what that will be used for. So there may be opportunities there as well, but that's going to be a little bit farther. You'd probably have a better luck with the grant programs, in the next couple of years if you're trying to do that soon.
Okay, and the next question, not sure which one of you wants to take this one, but they would like to know, why are these charging stations the government's responsibility? They say gas stations are private. Why not let supply and demand run its course?
Well, yeah, I'll just take a stab at that. So as non-elected federal officials, that's a debate for not public time, I guess. We're trying to facilitate a program that was given to us by Congress. So I'm sure both sides have a view of that, but officially we're through the bill, through the IIJA, these funds have been allocated to the state of Ohio, and we will try to administer them thusly.
Yeah, and the ODOT's plan is not to operate and maintain.
Right. Well, and Katie, we talked a little bit about it. There's a lot of new here, whether it's looking from the administration of the program through a joint office from the Department of Energy and USDOT to Title 23 procurement and development program language to funding that deals with private property and other, detail-oriented things where ODOT is not traditionally responsible for. So I think everybody, the calls that we've been on with our federal partners, everybody has been willing to be, flexible and kind of, be able to work to the end goal of getting the program developed and the funds out the door.
Yeah, I think when it comes to EVs, there's always like the chicken or the egg. Do you cars before you put the charging, or you put the charging in and hope people buy the cars? And some of this really high level is just trying to figure out how to get charging in areas that maybe don't have the current adoption levels to support positive revenue, just to get them over the hump so that the adoption increases, and then that'll be, take care of itself.
Okay, there was one follow-up to the question that came from the city of Sylvania. You said start building coalitions. Who would you suggest be in these coalitions?
I would say, well, first of all, utilities, local stakeholders, local governments. The interesting thing about the fleet conversation, an industry partner. The broader and the wider the table of the conversation, the more people you have around the table talking about this, that see this as a priority, the better it's going to be long-term to developing and implementing.
Yeah, because I think if you're going to go after funding, like one of these federal grants, you wouldn't just go after like funding of one individual charger on a specific quarter. You may have like a compelling story about like some workplace vehicles are charging and something happening with one of the schools, or, you know, you'd have like a more robust narrative and maybe pull in some other pieces just as far as like, you know, viability of a grant. So I think that's, you know, part of it.
Okay, next question. How much does it cost to charge a vehicle at these stations, and who pays the cost, or how is the money collected?
It's a really good question because it varies from state to state and locality to locality. Julie Brogan and I were talking this last week, specific to how you would advertise a cost for the fuel, right? You know, so there are standards that, you know, in the state of Ohio, the Department of Agriculture and 88 counties auditors administer some of this stuff. It really is right now. It's up to the individual site host to kind of work through payment. Is there a charge for the cost? How that payment is collected? You know, just to take an example from the private sector, Tesla does all of theirs through an app-based type of charging. So those are one of the questions that we're going to have to answer as these locations come online.
There's a question about wanting to know if there's a specific city engagement plan to take place.
So direct engagement for cities. We've been currently, we have reached out to MPOs and RTPOs to start that conversation. But if individual cities are interested in learning more, feel free to connect with us. We're in the process, you know, events such as this, we're starting to do a lot more of. So as those opportunities present themselves, we would welcome the engagement.
And they would also like to know what items should a municipality focus on when developing an EV charging plan?
I would start by reading the DriveOhio plans. Selfishly, because that first siting study was kind of, you know, there's a lot of technical detail in there. We almost wrote it in a type of electrification 101 to kind of set a baseline on things you should be thinking about and just like technical data. I would start there and then, you know.
I think the Smart Columbus playbook has some good information, which so if you want to go beyond, you know, public charging, they have more information on workplace and like multi-unit dwellings and just a whole variety of other things that you might be interested in.
In local utilities, like, you know, AEP with Smart Columbus and some of the electrification work they did, AEP partnered on some programs. So just knowing what your utility is doing locally, how much power and what specific areas is helpful as well.
Another question that seemed pretty important for our local partners is they want to know if this is a reimbursement grant program. Do the site hosts have to pay out of pocket initially and then get reimbursed once installed?
So the discretionary funds will be grant. Title 23, this will be, yeah, that's a good question on the.
Well, I think, are they asking about the 2.5 billion, the stuff that's coming out in November? Yes, you have to do the work and then you get reimbursed. The NEVI funds, like the states are coming up with the guidance. Is that the question?
Yeah, that's what they wanted to know. So, and that's fine. We have everybody's email address, so we can follow up with some additional information afterwards once you guys get that all worked out.
We can send those links to the playbook and then the DriveOhio report and a few.
Yeah, we'll identify.
And the dashboard,
yeah.
You know, because if you're a municipality, you might want to just be familiar with that. It gives you a lot of stats about where adoption is in your geography.
Okay, the next question is, do you anticipate the 140 million being enough to meet the minimum requirement NEVI has of every 50 miles? And do you anticipate exceeding the every 50-mile requirement in more urbanized areas?
So the first part, yeah, I think the funding level should fill the gaps per the guidance. Once those gaps are filled, we would look to utilize funds that would, more robustly build out the system, whether that's urban, rural. That's kind of one of the questions that we're thinking about. Once the first tier, the tier 1 is done, the identified corridors is done, what's that process and what does that look like?
Next question, are the EV charging stations being built with the flexibility to include other fuels, such as CNG, hydrogen fuel cell, or LNG on these alternative fuel corridors?
So no, they have straight electric.
Each of those is a different process and like a different supply chain and infrastructure. So that's not the current plan.
And there, if you look at the bill holistically, there's all kinds of different programs that talk about hydrogen hubs, and so there's other programs within the legislation that cover some of that stuff.
Yeah, and also even not through federal highway, but through Department of Energy. There's a lot of programs if you're interested in other alternative fuels that are coming out. I know there's quite a few coming out next November for hydrogen, and there's other things coming out, every few months.
Okay, and then next question, are there any plans on how to replace lost tax revenue with electric vehicles to pay for road maintenance and new construction?
So ODOT is actively looking at that right now, trying to see as a transition from ICE, internal combustion engines, to electric, how that will impact revenue dollars for highways. So we are actively looking at that, yes.
And you can see in the medium and heavy duty freight, the freight electrification report, which we can send a link to. There's a graph that kind of looked at the revenue impact for medium and heavy duty. Now for light duty, Ohio actually passed legislation, was it, I forget which year, maybe 2 years ago?
17, 18.
A couple of years ago. So there's a $200 fee, registration fee for a full battery electric vehicle, and there's $100 for hybrid or PHEV vehicles right now. So that's offsetting for passenger vehicles. But it's only for people, people registered in Ohio.
Okay, next question. How do you plan to ensure that installations are installed so communities of color can access the stations easily in line with the Justice 40 initiatives?
So how do we plan to hit that goal? Was that the question?
Yeah, how do you plan to make sure that the installations are installed so communities of color can access the stations easily?
What we have been trying to get from local partners is how they look at equity, right? So, and equity is more, includes rural as well. So, how do we hit that target is going to be extremely important, not only to urban, but also to rural. And with that, that's where some of the utility work also comes in. Where is this power? Where is the power accessible? So, getting to work with NPOs and local communities is going to be really important as we try to hit those targets.
Next question, are EV vehicles offered on the state of Ohio procurement site?
I don't think so.
Well, Department of Administrative Services added, has state term contracts for EVs and for EVSC, so for the charging stations. I think when they initially put them on maybe a year and a half ago, I know there were 7 different providers for the charging stations. I'm not sure how many vehicles are on there right now, but that was Daryl. What's Daryl?
Seiler.
Seiler is a good contact for that. he going to be upset?
But that highlights, especially on the fleet side, that highlights one of the, it's not a model causal solution to some of this stuff. That's a really good question when it comes to fleet and adopting and getting this know-how in local communities and across the state and the agencies.
They already have like negotiated rates, so you wouldn't have to go through procurement. You could just buy off of that if you're a local government.
And someone, Katie, wanted you to repeat the name of the resource you referenced for private sector charging infrastructure.
I'm wondering if they're talking about Electrify America. I mentioned as far as like they'd put in the really high power chargers. They're the ones that kind of grew out of the Volkswagen settlement funds. They were organized to do that. The top, I guess the top 5 like charging companies are like ChargePoint, EVgo, Electrify America, Blink, and I'm probably forgetting one. And then, yeah, Green Lots. So it's not Green Lots anymore. It's Shell Recharge. And then down in Cincinnati, Electrada's in Cincinnati.
So when we did our level 2 work, Electrada put those facilities into it, ODOT facilities into it, ODNI facilities.
Yeah, and they can help you if you want to think through options.
Next question, is IR 480 going to be submitted for a corridor grant?
You're the engineer. Where's that?
That's Cleveland, south of Cleveland. That hasn't been, we haven't figured out like what's getting submitted for grants yet. And I'm not sure if ODOT's submitting their own grants or if they're going to support others in submittals or how that's all going to.
So yeah, we really, for the discretionary pots of funds, we're really kind of waiting on the funds to give us some details.
Okay, and then another question, are there advancements being made with a modular battery system for vehicles?
So like just switching out batteries instead of charging them?
I believe that's what they're asking, yep.
I'm not in the skunk works of OEMs, but I would, just seeing what some of the stuff in the air, on the air side, I would think that, yeah, both innovation will be innovative. Rich?
I can jump in quick. I mean, I know that for a while I heard that Tesla had been looking at that and then kind of stepped back from it. I know from just other technology areas I've personally been around, it's a natural idea that comes to mind. I mean, personally, I thought, I asked that similar question not too long ago, and when I talked with some what I would say experts in the area, there are just some complexities from what you might call a system engineering perspective of things like interfaces and how to get it to reliably work. So intuitively, it gets around this time charge. So I can certainly understand the question. Practically, I feel like there are some engineering challenges that we've been hearing about, but if anyone in the audience knows of some new technologies we should be tracking, that's part of what DriveOhio does, is we try to keep track of startups, especially homegrown in Ohio. So if there's anybody developing such a thing in the state, we would love to hear about it.
I mean, there's one company in China that's got small vehicles.
We need you closer, Katie, I'm sorry.
There's a company in China that's doing that with like some small EVs. I also don't know if that question maybe was related to like charging stations. You can just add packs of, you can add power, and they call it blocks of power depending on which company you're dealing with. So you can just increase those, and you can, set it up to be able to ultimately go up to 350, but only purchase the equipment for 150 and then add on. So I don't know if that's maybe another way they were looking at that question. And there's also like different things you can do with these locations. Like you can have solar and then have that go into a battery and then, output if you've got challenges, if you're pretty far away from electricity, or if you can only stream in like 240 volts and you need to output at a higher level. So there's a lot of different options.
Yeah, the microgrid concept has come up.
Yeah.
Good point.
Well, thank you everyone who has attended, and especially thank you to our presenters. I know we've had a ton of questions, but if you have follow-up questions, the presentation that is available to you for download or we'll be sending out afterwards has everyone's contact information in it. So we appreciate your attendance at today's webinar. It'll be a week or so and we'll get your certificates out to you for attendance today. And I hope everyone's able to have a great rest of their day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thanks.